Hi guys, how are you? Welcome to our session 6. So this is an online session, as you know. Our theme today is again designing for adult learning and development with a specific focus on creating equitable learning environments for all participants. Okay, so our objectives are over here on the left today. So again, still, of course, thinking about the different stages in adult development, thinking about designing effective professional learning, and then also to really be thinking about the work that you're doing right now with your PLP and the professional learning that you're designing for your colleagues. So our agenda is right over here. We're going to look back at our norms, talk about the feedback from last time, revisit a slide that I showed you last time about how leaders design for learning that's based on the Brendan Stein reading. We're going to talk about the Brookfield article. I want to talk to you a little bit about a practice called counter storytelling. We're actually going to look at or hear some counter stories. Then we're going to head over to DESE to look at some profiles of our schools, and then I have sort of a to-do list for you for this session. So there are our norms, all good things, I think. Okay, so feedback from our last class. A lot of people liked the block party protocol. A couple of you mentioned that it would be something that you could use in your classes with your own students, which is great. That's where I just pulled out the quotes from the article and you sort of walked around and had conversations with different colleagues. Some people didn't like the protocol matching, so that's fine. I hear that. So the point with the protocols is just to try out a bunch of different ones. So hopefully there's something in there that resonates that you're able to use. There was a request to post the online class early, so that is my goal, trying to post it here by Sunday night so that you have a little bit early. And everything will still be due on Tuesday, April 2nd. And lots of love for the Critical Friends group, which is great. I also asked what you planned on writing journal number 3 on, which is due on Tuesday, the 26th. Um, so most people were planning on writing a reflection on meeting number 1 or meetings number 1 and 2. And then a smaller number of people were going to reflect on student data or adult data. It's all good. Okay, so just to revisit this, this is based on one of the Brendan Stein chapters that you had read for the last time, but we didn't spend as much time on this piece here. So I just took the chapter and broke it down into a checklist of thinking about when we're designing. So right now you guys are designing professional learning for small groups of colleagues, but obviously that's situated in the larger picture of the school. So just some questions to think about. What does our school and its students need us to learn? We're going to be thinking a lot about the students that we have in front of us now while we're working through the next couple of slides here. Um, you know, how often do we really consider closely like what it is that the kids need us as the adults to be learning to better improve their learning? Number 2 is really huge for us today. Who are our teachers? So we've talked about the 3 different types of learning, a group, instrumental socializing, self-authoring, just kind of thinking about, both who you are as a learner and who this particular group is. Just thinking, how are we designing for newer teachers, and then how are we designing for more veteran teachers? So a lot of times PD, and we've talked about this, is not always differentiated enough to meet the needs of people at different points in their career, but definitely important. And then super important, connected to our reading today, what difference does race make in a school's learning? Um, so what is the racial makeup of the staff? What is the makeup of the students? And how well are we sort of attending to that? So one of the articles you read, this is a very, what I would call very heady article. When I was rereading it, this type of reading certainly takes time. There is not a lot written on this topic, so that certainly says something. This Brookfield article is a couple years old, but really good. And he's talking about, looking at the talk around adult education from a racial perspective. And I thought this quote really stood out to me. I highlighted this toward the beginning. A field of practice is racialized when its dominant conceptualizations and the mechanisms it has in place for the production and dissemination of knowledge are grounded in one particular racial group's experiences. In the case of US adult education, white Euro Americans, and the forms of thought that flow from these. So I know that we had a previous class where we talked about talking about and discussing race. We talked about of the three types of learning. This is not typically the type of learning that goes on in school, but when we think, we're going to look at a statistic later on that about 50% of our students nationwide are students of color, whereas 80% of the teaching force identifies as white. So this is something important for us to think about and talk about. And then when we think about designing learning, thinking about the way that we are designing is coming a lot of the times from the way that we learn. That's why it's important to think about the way other people learn, including like how people from different backgrounds learn that may differ from the way that you and I would learn. Couple more. This is from the end of the Brookfield article. So when you're thinking about designing learning for adults and thinking about designing learning for adults, not just adults who identify as white, just some things to think about. So one of the things he talks about is the misconception that all teachers and learners are the same. So we would equate this to color blindness, which, as we talked about, is very damaging. It's easy to say as a white person that you're colorblind because race does not have to impact you in the same way that it would a person of color. The other way that Eurocentrism manifests is the deficit perspective of non-white educators. The author points out Hispanics in particular, or anyone whose first language is not English. We see this with students too, just the assumption that someone whose first language is not English is not going to be as intelligent as someone whose first language is, which is a complete misconception. Whites typically are the producers of knowledge. I mean, just when we think about the nature of curriculum, that's something I think about a lot. What are our students studying? Who are they learning about? Who can they see in what they're learning about in school? It's very easy to see who's often left out, right? So much of what students have studied comes from one perspective, even though, again, the population of students that all of us have in front of us is not predominantly a white population. The other manifestation is number 4, the emphasis on learner characteristics and processes, including self-directed learning, critical reflection, and the teacher's source of knowledge. So other ways of learning, such as learning being part of a community, can be seen as deficient. So just some things to consider about how we design education for adults and who is in the room. So I want to talk for a minute about something called counter storytelling. So just keeping in mind that I obviously am white, many of us are white. If we're going to talk about the needs of teachers of color, we want to hear from teachers of color. So one of the things I'm going to have you do for this class is watch 2 shorter videos. This idea of counter storytelling is something that I used in my own research. So, thinking back to Eurocentrism, counter stories, on the other hand, come from people of color, communities of color, people whose first language are not English. So they are stories that typically go against the story that we've always been telling us about ourselves, about how the world is, or about how schools are. So it's really important and for us to hear these different stories, these counter stories. So that being said, and I'll give you the links on the next slide, I'm going to ask you when you're working on this class to watch these 2 videos. So the first one is from a professor at Boston University who had done some research about retention and support for teachers of color. So that was on CityLine. So you're going to watch that. That's about 8 minutes. And then there's a series of videos. It's really wonderful. I've watched several of them. Community organizers got together in Chicago. So they got teachers, students, parents, educators of color to have a discussion. So you're going to watch this one video. It's pretty brief, just about these individuals' experiences themselves having educators of color or not. And there's that statistic that I pointed out, more than 50% of public school students in the United States are students of color. If we look at our local districts, we have many, many Hispanic students, and you'll see actually when we look at the demographics in a second how that population continues to grow over time. Okay, so something else I'm gonna have you do, and really like this class here, I just want you to be reflecting and thinking about all of this, and that's how I've structured the work that you're gonna do online. Um, for many of us, myself included, I did not spend a lot of time, if any at all, thinking about who the teachers are in the school versus who the students are, how critically important it is to have and support teachers of color, and even the ways in which we design learning for adults, making sure we're supporting diverse points of view. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to do this here, is actually to go to the school and district's profile page on DESE, and I'm going to walk you through the data that I want you to look at. So you're going to click here. So this brings us to the school and district's profile page. You just want to click here on Suffolk County, and then I'm just going to click on Revere, but you'll click on your community. And I'm just going to choose an elementary school in Revere. I'm going to actually just choose the Lincoln School. It's one of our 6 elementary schools. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at the student and teacher populations over the past 10 years. So here I'm going to start with students. Click here. Okay, and this gives us the demographic data for 2019. So I'm going to click back to 2009 and just for this example, focus in on the Hispanic student population. So this 2019, we're at 51%, 18, 48%, 2017, 43, 2016, 39. Then went back up a little in 2015 to 42, 38%, and then we're at 39%, 38%, and I'm just going to click back here to 2009, about 34%. So that is quite a leap in 10 years. Just mirrors that data that we're seeing, right, about the changes in our student population. And then I want you to do the same thing. Click on the teacher tab for your school. And then you're going to just need to click on staffing data by race, ethnicity, and gender. And just so you know, this isn't in percentage, it's in numbers. If you see something funny here like 0.8, it's probably accounting for part-time teachers. So this is at the same school, the Lincoln School. And if you notice, they have for their full-time staff 64.8, and 63 of those individuals are white, and 1 person is Hispanic. And same thing right here, I want you to click back through the years and just observe the teacher population, just so you have that information on your mind. Okay, I'm gonna go back here. All right, so that is that. Okay, so again, you've watched these 2 different videos. You've looked at that information for your school. And this is what I made you 1 list, and I'll also repeat this on Canvas. So for this course, I only made 1 section because I know that some of you also have your class with Margaret this week. So just being aware of that, and I just really want you to spend the time reflecting on this very important but often not talked about topic. So again, for this class, you're going to watch Dr. Travis Bristol from BU. Then you're going to watch this group of parents, teachers, and students, Black parents, teachers, and students talk about the need for more Black teachers. Go to DESE and look at the student and teacher demographic data for the past 8 to 10 years for your school. On Canvas, there'll be a quick write prompt for you to do. And then you're just going to choose just 1 to 2 lines from your quick write to share on a discussion thread and respond to 1 colleague's post. Please, as always, you'll give me your session feedback, and all of this should be done by April 2nd. Our last in-person meeting will be on April 9th. If you have any questions before that, please reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing all of you and hearing from you then.